Hello, we are now on day 8 of Mice and Men. So, start off with today's warm up has nothing to do with Of Mice and Men, but it is one of the questions from your first reading assignment that most of the students miss. So, we put those on there for you to take another look at them, for you to be able to see the right answers, because you'll be taking a reading test coming up in next week, actually the end of next week. And so we want to make sure that you see these most missed questions so that hopefully the next time you see a question like that, you don't miss it. But moving on to Of Mice and Men, today's lesson, readers look for clues about how a novel will develop by looking for metaphors or connections between different elements within the book that share traits or descriptions. So we're going to see a pair in our novel and how what they're going through kind of mimics what George and Lenny are going through. So we are starting on page 43, and again, pages are linked for you. So we're towards the bottom of that, the last kind of like large paragraph on that page. It was almost dark outside now. Old Candy the Swamper came in and went to his bunk, and behind him struggled his old dog. Hello, Slim. Hello, George. Didn't either of you play horseshoes? I don't like to play every night, said Slim. Candy went on. Either you guys got a slug of whiskey? I got a gut ache. I ain't, said Slim. I'd drink it myself if I had. I ain't got a gut ache neither. Got a bad gut ache, said Candy. Them goddamn turnips give it to me. I knowed they was going to before I ever eat 'em. The thick-bodied Carlson came in out of the darkening yard. He walked to the other end of the bunkhouse and turned on the second shaded light. Darker'n hell in here, he said. Jesus, how that stable butt can pitch shoes. He's plenty good, said Slim. Damn right he is, said Carlson. He don't give nobody else a chance to win. He stopped and sniffed at the air, and still sniffing, looked down at the old dog. God almighty, that dog stinks. Get him out of here, Candy. I don't know nothing that stinks as bad as an old dog. You gotta get him out. Candy rolled to the edge of the bunk. He reached over and patted the ancient dog, and he apologized. I've been around him so much, I never notice how he stinks. Well, I can't stand him in here, said Carlson. That stink hangs around even after he's gone. He walked over with his heavy-legged stride and looked down at the dog. Got no teeth, he said. He's all stiff with rheumatism. He ain't no good to you, Candy, and he ain't no good to himself. Why don't you shoot him, Candy? The old man squirmed uncomfortably. Well, hell, I had him so long. Had him since he was a pup. I herded sheep with him, he said proudly. You wouldn't think it to look at him now, but he was the best damn sheepdog I ever seen. George said, I seen a guy in Weed that had an Airedale could herd sheep. Learned it from the other dogs. Carlson was not to be put off. Look, Candy, this old dog just suffers himself all the time. If you was to take him out and shoot him right in the back of the head, he leaned over and pointed. Right here, well, he'd never know what hit him. Candy looked about unhappily. No, he said softly. No, I couldn't do that. I had him too long. He don't have no fun, Carlson insisted, and he stinks to beat hell. Tell you what, I'll shoot him for you. Then it won't be you that does it. Candy threw his legs off his bunk. He scratched the white stubble whiskers on his cheek nervously. I'm so used to him, he said softly. I had him from a pup. Well, you ain't being kind to him, keeping him alive, said Carlson. Look, Slim's bitch got a litter right now. I bet Slim would give you one of them pups to raise up. Wouldn't you, Slim? The Skinner had been studying the old dog with his calm eyes. Yeah, he says, you can have a pup if you want to. He seemed to shake himself free for speech. Carl's right, Candy. That dog ain't no good to himself. I wish somebody'd shoot me if I got old and a cripple. Candy looked helplessly at him, for Slim's opinions were law. Maybe it'd hurt him, he suggested. I don't mind taking care of him. Carlson said, the way I'd shoot him, he wouldn't feel nothing. I'd put the gun right there, he pointed with his toe, right back of the head. He wouldn't even quiver. Candy looked for help from face to face. It was quite dark outside by now. A young laboring man came in, his sloping shoulders were bent forward, and he walked heavily on his heels as though he carried the invisible grain bag. He went to his bunk and put his hat on his shelf. He then picked up a pulp magazine from his shelf and brought it to the light over the table. Okay, before we get into what this guy's looking at, I want to talk a little bit about Candy and his dog. So Candy is the guy who works on the ranch. He is missing one of his hands, and this dog's been with him for years and years, very close to him. We know that it's totally normal as animals age and their quality of life goes down, that we do put them down, especially in more rural area. Shooting the dog, in a humane way is totally normal. So that's not... shouldn't really throw us at all. But it's that connection between Candy and his dog that we want to pay attention to. So he says that he's had him since he was a pup. They've always been together. They've been a pair, a duo. Just like, since again we're comparing two pairs here, George and Lenny. They've been together for years and years and years. They are a duo. So that's kind of what you want to put in that box. That comparison there, the level of emotion, because as they've said many times, many of the ranchers don't travel together. They're very lonely and on their own. So here we have a couple people who are not alone. Candy has his dog and George and Lenny have each other. Candy worries. He says, for quote 2, maybe it hurt him. I don't mind taking care of him. Again, we see that with George. George doesn't want other people to hurt Lenny. He doesn't want them to take advantage of him. And so he doesn't mind taking care of Lenny. I mean, he frustrates him. He gets annoyed, but ultimately he wants to take care of him. Okay, so we're going to... I'm going to skip reading this next part. I'll just tell you a little bit about it. The new guy comes in. His name, I don't even know if we learn his name. Whit. Whit comes in and he's got a magazine, and in it is a letter to the editor that a ranch hand that used to work there sent in. And Whit's just so amazed. He's like, oh my gosh, he sent in this letter about how much he loves his magazine, and they finally published it. But Peter, the guy who sent the letter in, no longer works there. And Whit's like, I don't even know what happened to him. But I hope he got to see this magazine. And it's just there to highlight again that these men, for the most part, they don't travel together. Even if they start a friendship on a ranch, eventually they go their separate ways. They don't decide to go on to the next ranch together. So Peter's story kind of just confirms that. So we're going to skip that, and we are going to go to the middle of page 47 to go back to this issue with Candy and his dog. During the conversation, Carlson had refused to be drawn in. He continued to look down at the old dog. Candy watched him uneasily. At last Carlson said, if you want me to, I'll put the old devil out of his misery right now and get it over with. Ain't nothing left for him. Can't eat, can't see, can't even walk without hurting. Candy said hopefully, you ain't got no gun. The hell I ain't got a Luger. It won't hurt him none at all. Candy said, maybe tomorrow. Let's wait till tomorrow. I don't see no reason for it, said Carlson. He went to his bunk, pulled his bag from underneath it, and took out a Luger pistol. Let's get it over with, he said. We can't sleep with him stinking around in here. He put the pistol in his hip pocket. Candy looked a long time at Slim to try to find some reversal, and Slim gave him none. At last Candy said softly and hopelessly, all right, take him. He did not look down at the dog at all. He lay back on his bunk and crossed his arms behind his head and stared at the ceiling. From his pocket, Carlson took a little leather thong. He stooped over and tied it around the old dog's neck. All the men except Candy watched him. Come on, boy, he said gently. And he said apologetically to Candy, he won't even feel it. Candy did not move nor answer him. He twitched the thong. Come on, boy. The old dog got slowly and stiffly to his feet and followed the gently pulling leash. Slim said, Carlson? Yeah? You know what to do. What you mean, Slim? Take a shovel? Said Slim shortly. Oh, sure, I get you. He led the dog out into the darkness. George followed to the door and shut the door and set the latch gently in its place. Candy lay rigidly on his bed, staring at the ceiling. Slim said loudly, one of my lead mules got a bad hoof. Got to get some tar on it. His voice trailed off. It was silent outside. Carlson's footsteps died away. The silence came into the room, and the silence lasted. George chuckled. I bet Lenny's right out there in the barn with his pup. He won't want to come in here no more now he's got a pup. Slim said, Candy, you can have any one of them pups you want. Candy did not answer. The silence fell in the room again. It came out of the night and invaded the room. George said, anybody like to play a little euchre? I'll play a few with you, said Whit. They took places opposite each other at the table under the light, but George did not shuffle the cards. He rippled the edge of the deck nervously, and the little snapping noise drew the eyes of all the men in the room, so that he stopped doing it. The silence fell in the room again. A minute passed, and another minute. Candy lay still, staring at the ceiling. Slim gazed at him for a moment and then looked down at his hands. He subdued one hand with the other and held it down. There came a little gnawing sound from under the floor, and all the men looked down toward it gratefully. Only Candy continued to stare at the ceiling. Sounds like there was a rat under there, said George. We ought to get a trap down there. Whit broke out. What the hell's taking him so long? Lay out some cards, why don't you? We ain't going to get no euchre played this way. George brought the cards together tightly and studied the backs of them. The silence was in the room again. A shot sounded in the distance. The men looked quickly at the old man. Every head turned toward him. For a moment, he continued to stare at the ceiling. Then he rolled slowly over, faced the wall, and lay silent. So, Candy, who does not want to shoot his dog, who is not ready to put his dog down, ultimately agrees to it. And what we need to pay attention to is just before he agrees to it, he turns to look at Slim because Slim has power. People respect him. And Slim doesn't say anything. Slim doesn't say, hey, Carlson, leave Candy alone, let the dog alone. Slim just sits there and is basically in support of putting the dog down. And that's when Candy says, okay, go ahead and put him down. So our quotes, we have Carlson saying he can't eat, he can't see, he can't even walk without hurting. It's just to show the burden that the dog places on Candy, similarly to how Lenny places a burden on George. Obviously, Lenny can eat and take care of himself physically, but always getting them in trouble and things like that. Then Candy looked a long time at Slim, trying to find some reversal. Slim give him none. So again, that's where Candy's hoping that Slim will say, nah, just let the dog live for now. And he doesn't. So Candy, while he's the one who says it, doesn't even ultimately make the decision about what happens with the dog. So who's going to make the decision about what happens with Lenny? Everything in this book we know is building up towards Lenny doing something. We keep talking about how Lenny can't remember things and Lenny gets them in trouble and Lenny, doesn't listen very well and George keeps having to take care of Lenny. So we know we're going somewhere with that. And some sort of decision is going to have to be made when it comes to whether or not George and Lenny get their own ranch, whether or not George and Lenny get fired, and who's going to make that decision. So that's kind of what this pairing represents. Will George be able to make the decision for Lenny, even though Candy couldn't for his situation? We don't really know. Then all the men are in the room, and they're waiting. They're talking about playing cards. They're talking about a mule that needs his hoof tarred and all of that. But we know they're all just waiting. They're all just listening for the sound of that shot because that means that the dog has been put down. And when it happens, Candy just rolls over, faces the wall, and doesn't say anything. So it's actually a very sad moment in our novel. You are now going to look for important quotes in your own novel, just as we've been doing. Make sure that you get this turned in. We have 2 more days of Mice and Men this week, and then again, vocabulary due next Wednesday for Mrs. Hancock students, and we have a reading test. Nothing you need to prepare for. It's kind of like that first reading assignment. Read some passages, answer some multiple choice questions, maybe a short answer question or 2. That will be not this Friday, but next Friday. Mrs. Knox's classes and Mrs. Coper's classes, the schedule should be the same or close to that. But again, they'll let you guys know that through Canvas. So have a great day, and I will see you for day 9 of Mice and Men later.